Bismillah ar-Rahman Good evening, everyone. This is again Dr. Sameh, and this is again another step or stop on our long journey. It's um, it's very interesting. As far as I'm concerned, this is very engaging and very interesting. I don't know about you guys. I don't know. I trust that you are also enjoying it. It's a lot of discussions and talk about the novel and what the novel stands for. Of course, I'm referring to Wuthering Heights. Today, inshallah, we're finishing off Wuthering Heights, so that next week we're starting The Sign of War by Dial. Before I get started, I would like to ask you if you have any questions. I think I need to also record the class. This is Dr. Sam, and this class 4, right? Okay, we are on our way. The class is being recorded as usual. So Arch is saying no questions from me. We have Sarah so far, so clear. Kamar, are we going to discuss the TMA? Yeah, we can do that at the end of the class, inshallah. Kamar, you don't have a problem. Al-Ustaz, I read the whole novel. That's interesting to know. Okay. Uh, it's a good discovery. I mean, Al-Ustaz is saying that the novel has two generations. Yeah, which is correct, more or less. Yes. Okay. So what we have today, we'll start the new chapter, chapter 6, and then somehow I'm going to kind of link together the technical part that that chapter 6 partly addresses, and the technical part of chapter 5. Remember, in chapter 5 there was also talk about um, technique, I mean the technique of realism, and there was also talk about romance. We'll talk about that when we come to it in chapter 6. So somehow I'm going to integrate chapter 5 and 6 together. Uh, okay. So you guys said that you can see the screen, right? And this is again, this is chapter 6, Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights, Uproot. So over the past 2 to 3 weeks, we've been talking about the idea of home. Of course, we started off with the introduction to the age, the Victorian age. We spoke about its standards and conventions. Standards and conventions that we read the novel against. Not only this novel, of course, this would apply to the other two novels that we will discuss together in the upcoming weeks. So it's like I always say, it's very important that you understand the background of the age. You know what the age is all about in terms of ideals, in terms of principles, uh, so that when you read the novel, those ideas and ideals inform the reading of the novel, inform the reading of the novel in the sense that it gives you it expands your horizons about the novel. It is true that I am one of the advocates of formal readings of novels. The formal reading of a novel means that you separate the novel and divorce it from its background so that you check its literariness, what makes it a novel. It's not, we don't read it as a social or a historical document, but in our case and for our purposes, we have to somehow find affinities between what is happening in the novel and what used to happen in the age. Somehow you need to read the novel against its age. When you spoke about the age, we spoke about a number of principles and a number of ideals. And on top of those ideals, of course, was the idea of Victorian respectability and conservatism as given expression in the idea of home. We spoke long and enough about the idea of home and how this idea of home is materialized. We said that there is more to home than the dictionary meaning of the word, right? Home is bigger than just the house or the room that you may have. It's bigger. Its associations have to do with the, you know, Victorian conventions again, the Victorian idea of respectability, and somehow this idea of respectability is linked to women and their role, if any, in society. So we're talking about the Victorian home, and we are inside the Victorian home where the woman is given some space, is given duties. Okay, whether those duties are, you know, are big enough, whether they are satisfactory to the women folks at the time and all the time, this is besides the point. So we have the idea of home with the associations of comfort, safety, away from the threats um, of the new realities in London and in England. So home was more or less like a safe haven or a refuge where there is a great deal of safety and security and of course comfort. The fact that there is a female element awaiting, and she is expected to make everything she can, to make everything in her power so that she can make the male elements of the family satisfied and happy. To the extent that the you know, the literature of the time, whether it was philosophical or social, um, um, it was promoting just that. Remember when we spoke about Ruskin and what expectations he had of wives and women. Uh, Remember this poet, I think he was called Peyton or something, Patmore, who wrote a whole poem titled, like Kamar is saying, titled "The Angel in the House," um, where the focus was on exploring, you know, what is expected of women within the house. So these were ideas that were promoted at the time, and we I mean, the novels and the works of art at the time reflect or used to reflect them in one way or another. Wuthering Heights gives expression to these ideas, but perhaps in a topsy-turvy way, if you like. Topsy-turvy way. I mean, she. I mean, by she, of course, I mean Emily Bronte. She is challenging these conventions. She is uncovering and exploring them, and she's leaving it all to the reader to decide whether they are worthwhile or not. Obviously, over the course of perhaps 2 weeks, we have made up our mind that some of these, kind of conventional practices are wrong, are not fair when it comes to women, and rather than getting angry and getting upset with Bronte, perhaps this is my stance. This is how I see it. She could earn our admiration and appreciation because of the fact that she was ahead of her time. Most of the issues and even most of the techniques that she was using are now used in the they were used much later in the 20th century and in the 21st century. But she was a true pioneer and she was ahead of her time, to say the least. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to chapter 6. Like I said, it's Emily Bronte again, and it's Wuthering Heights again, but this time around it's abroad. We are talking about or addressing the theme or the idea of abroad. And abroad, of course, is whatever is not home. It would be an antonym for our purposes. It would be an antonym of the word home. Again, if we talk about abroad, we wouldn't also confine it or limit it to the dictionary meaning of the word abroad, traveling or commuting from one place to another. There is obviously a movement that is more subtle, which is within the soul and the mind of the characters, and this is obviously what would count eventually. This is where our focus is. There is a great deal of movement, of course, physical movement, and we'll touch on that. But what I'm trying to say is that the movement inside is sometimes more important, and the movement is also doesn't have to do with again the physical uh, I mean leaving a place and going somewhere else. It can also be on the level of techniques. We're migrating from traditional techniques to new ones. We're somehow moving from long established forms, artistic and literary forms, to I wouldn't say new one, but there is a great deal of addition and alterations to them, as we are going to see in a bit. Am I making sense? Okay. Kamar is asking me about the idea of movement, and like I said, we have different levels of movement. We have different levels of, uh, I mean, there are different associations to the word movement and the word abroad. Again, the physical movement would be there, but again, there is movement within the mind and the soul of the characters. We are also seeing shifts when it comes to techniques and forms. Whether Emily Bronte is observing old techniques is following them or she's migrating away from them. This is also um, one of the issues that we're going to discuss tonight, inshallah. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so it's Wuthering Heights and the World Beyond. Okay, again, what do we have in the novel? What are the basic um, ideas, or what are the basic pillars of the novel? The fact that we have two houses, right? The fact that we have different generations, that the fact that we have different narrators, right? The fact that we have a great deal of correspondence in terms and parallels. These are ideas that we have already established. Reading the novel and discussing it for 2 weeks made us come up with a number of conclusions that we are going to rely on when we address new issues. Again, what is now basic about the novel, what is now known about the novel, our observations have to do with the idea of the two houses, the two contrasting houses, and what they stand for. Remember, Wuthering Heights would stand for a rural and primitive um surroundings, while the Grange would more or less stand for civilization and stuff, at least from the outside. Okay. Um, what else did we notice? We noticed that there is a great deal of correspondence and parallelism, and we said last time that this is perhaps part of the technique that Emily Bronte is deploying and is using. She's using the idea of parallels, whether we're talking about characters, whether we're talking about locations, whether we're talking about the houses and what happens outside the houses. We're saying that she is using all these parallels as a device or as a technique in order to further the action. I mean, it wasn't. We're trying to say that this was not done or made haphazardly or randomly. She has motives, and she has a plan, and she is obviously busy at work, making or fulfilling the items on her plan. Okay, so Wuthering Heights and the World uh, Beyond. When I say the world beyond, then I am summing up the idea of or giving another label for the word abroad. Okay, so whether you're talking about Wuthering Heights as a place, as a house or as a home, and the world beyond would mean moving to the Grange at one point, and moving beyond the Grange at another point when we see Heathcliff traveling outside and then coming back after a number of years, rich and educated. So these are also movements, and this is what we perhaps mean by the world beyond. Okay. um, we're starting off with the idea of reception, critical and otherwise. We spoke about the critical reception of the novel. um, I'm not going to limit it to critics and reviewers. So it's critics, reviewers, and also the reading public. Remember that the readers at the time, there were readers. Remember, at the time there was mass literacy. The fact that most of the British people at the time, or the English people at the time, were literate. They could read and write, and of course, novel reading in general and reading novels would be their best pastime or source of entertainment. Okay, so when I talk about the reception of the novel, I wouldn't limit it to only critics and reviewers. So we're talking about critics and reviewers, and also the educated public who now have access to education and they can read for themselves. There is a great deal of agreement between the critics and the reviewers on the one hand and the reading public. It seems that there is a unanimity among them, there is an agreement among them that the novel at its face value is a little bit shocking. And shocking not because it is presenting explicit stuff, shocking because of the ideas that Emily Bronte is set to challenge. She is challenging conventional sensibilities. One of them, of course, would be the idea of home. So the reception at the beginning was not that good. They didn't receive the novel that well at the beginning. Does it mean that this was across the board? Of course, there were a few voices that saw promise in what Emily Bronte was writing. They could tell that the literary scene is in for a promising writer. They of course referred to her, and they spoke about her inexperience, but they said she was original. She has what they call a rugged power. She is not imitating or mimicking other writers. Um, some of them went as far as saying that she could be a great dramatist if she decides to write plays and drama, if you still remember. Um, so we're moving beyond this, and we're talking about um, the reception of the novel uh, um, in the other in the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and of course I mean in America. In America, the novel was not well received, and the critics and the reviewers, when they spoke about the novel, they conflated the novel with the author of the novel. They couldn't make a distinction. So instead of kind of focusing on the novel itself and its internal artistic values, they would relate the novel to the author. And this is the approach that I keep asking you to stay away from. Remember, I tell you, you you don't. You read the novel or you need any work divorced from and away from the author of this work. Okay, you don't get influenced by what is being said about the author, good or bad. You focus on what makes this work the literariness, they call it the literariness of this work, what makes it a good novel, its intrinsic values, its intrinsic features and elements that would endear it to you and to others. Kamar is saying contextual reading. I would read your phrase from the word con. It would be textual reading, not contextual reading, Kamar. Contextual means that you look at the context, and the context could be social, economic, historical, and in this way you get affected by what used to happen in society. Okay, so again, the American approach to the novels of Emily Bronte was personal. They, like I said, they couldn't separate the author from her creation. They would deal with them as one thing. So the focus was not textual, it was authorial, and it was biographical. And this is again is not very objective. So, whereas most early British critical responses to the novel balanced criticism of its coarseness, if you still remember, with praise for its power and originality, some North American reviews were significantly less favorable. Less favorable, it means that they didn't find it, you know, interesting enough. They didn't find it technically powerful like the other like their British counterparts said. They they said bad stuff about the novel. One of the reviews reads, and I'm reading, "We fear that the author of Wuthering Heights has some unsound timbers in here. The rotten goings on within Wuthering Heights, the house, are here applied not just to the building but to the novel's author." I would like you to focus on the word rotten, rotten goings on. So they are describing what is happening in the novel as rotten, which is obviously a negative epithet or a negative adjective. Okay, so in general, they would uh, they would look at the novel as presenting or introducing two contrasting worlds. So the contrasting worlds of Wuthering Heights and Cross Grange represent a conflict between northern rural values and the more urban cultures of the south of England. Who is representing what I'm asking you? So we agree. We have established that already. But this is an echo of what we have been talking about. The fact that we have a clash or a conflict, a clash of civilizations, if you like, where you have two sides to the clash or the conflict. You have the north and you have the south. Who is representing the north? I'm asking you, who is representing the north and who is representing the south in this conflict or clash? Yeah, okay. So the north would be Wuthering Heights, okay, and its inhabitants, right? Okay. And who is, yes, and who is representing the south? In one sense, but before we talk about the Grange as representing the south, okay, okay, how about Lookwood? Lookwood comes from the south, right? So at one point, Lookwood would represent the south. So let's talk about the values and the qualities of each part. Okay, how would you describe the value? I need an adjective. An adjective would sum it up. What values do the North has or have? I'm sorry. What values does the North have? No, the North has rural, right? Primitive and rural values, right? While the South, what kind of Yeah, Ustaz is saying yes, the south is open. No, it's not the north, it's the south that is open-minded. No, it's the other way around, yeah, Ustaz. No, make no mistake about it. Okay, the southerners are open-minded here. We're talking about Lockwood, while the people in of the north, in this case, the Wuthering Heights people, are close-minded, are violent, or are primitive and rustic. You know, when they 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 could be good but rustic, but rural. Okay, so we have the rural values of the north, and they are in disagreement, and they are in conflict with the urban values of the south, as represented by the southerner Lookwood. Yes, this is what we're saying, yes, Sarah. The urban culture here is represented by the south of Britain, and we have a representation here and it happens to be, of course, Lookwood, the tenant, and one of the principal narrators of the novel. Okay, so the contrasting worlds of Wuthering Heights and the Thrush Crossing Ground represent a conflict between northern rural values and the more urban cultures of the south of England. Okay, so even within uh, the north, we have contrasting values. I haven't noticed them much. I mean, given the fact that at the end of the day, the inhabitants of the Grange are no different from those uh, uh, of Wuthering Heights, if you still remember. But the conflict is even highlighted and even foregrounded if we talk about Lookwood and the values, the southern values that he came with, and the rest of the inhabitants of Wuthering Heights, and even the Grange, with their rural and primitive, tastes and values. No, no, no. You're mixing and confusing. Heathcliff, no, no. Heathcliff is from the north. It's Lookwood who is from the south. Okay, okay. So to Lookwood, the north is strikingly. See how Lookwood, who represents the south, see how he looks at the north. To Lookwood, the north is strikingly other, a foreign place. To the inhabitants of the north, London and the south are equally foreign. You see how they look at each other? So Lookwood, who comes from the south, sees the north as other. I mean, the idea of other is also it's a concept in and of itself. You see yourself, it's we, or I and the other, and we and the other. There is always this sharp, uh, um, you know, distinction between the two. So when people other people, they make them other. They normally project all their negative stuff on this other. It's if you read you know, colonial and post-colonial literature, you're going to find the word other repeated in the manner of othering cultures, making them the other. And when you make them the other, you project all your negative stuff into them. Okay, you don't. I mean, they are the butt of your criticism, the butt of your attack, and everything. Okay, so um, like I said, Lockwood, who is from the south, look at the north as foreign, as other, and this is approved. Okay, he gives the associations of approved to the north, and also people who are from the north, the inhabitants of Wuthering Heights, look at him as other and as foreign. And we have a critic who is reinforcing these impressions that we are gathering um, about especially the north. We have Queenie Leavis, and she saw Wuthering Heights as home to a wholesome, primitive, and natural society pitted against the overdeveloped artificial culture of the Grange. Okay, so you have the two houses. Again, one of them would also represent, primitiveness, natural society, and okay, away from artificiality. And then the other house would be uh, the complete opposite, where you have sophistication, where you also have artificiality. Okay. We have a critic by the name of Terry Eggleton, a very famous one. Okay, Kamar is saying, I'm talking about levels. Okay. Okay, I'm talking about different levels. We'll come to what Nabila is saying in a minute, because obviously Nabila is going to take us to a different area. Let me just explain to Kamar what I mean, but by what I said. I said we have different levels of interpretation. Okay, we're talking about the overall conflict that we have, or clash, is between the values of the South as represented by Lockwood, okay, and the values of the North as represented by the people or the inhabitants of Wuthering Heights. This is level one. So Lockwood represent the South, and the inhabitants of Wuthering Heights represent the North. What are the values of the North? I mean, it's all about primitivism, about, simple people, rustic, not well trained into the ways of the world. Okay, their behavior is sometimes shocking, right? While Lockwood is, as a representative of the South, he is educated. Okay, he knows how to handle stuff, right? But this is a level. This is one level of the clash or conflict. Another level uh, uh, of the conflict or the clash would be between the two houses, where Wuthering Heights, as a house represents primitive ideals still, while the Grange, remember when we spoke about the Grange and we said that they are a little bit ahead uh, um, of the other house, until of course we go into the house and we discover that they are no different in terms of values, in terms of violence, and in terms of rudeness and all these kinds of things. So are you getting my point? Yeah, Kamar. Okay, let's go back to Nabila. And Nabila was saying something. Nabila is saying Lockwood encountered humans of different natures, from the civilized city to the countryside of Yorkshire, The dialect is different. Yeah. Yeah, this is a variation on what we're saying. Yeah, Nabila, more or less. Um, okay, Nabila is continuing and she's saying, I mean, if we take it as the standard of civilization in the sense of sophistication, the heights for him were other because they are completely different. This is what we are saying, yeah, Nabila, you're correct. You're putting it in different words. Thank you for the contribution and the input. Okay, so critic Queenie Leaves is also adding to the argument by saying that if you look at the two houses, you will have also representations of the north and the south, where Wuthering Heights would be the north with its rural values, with its natural society values, while the other house would represent, um, you know, artificial culture. It's developed, people inside look, um, oh, well mannered and all. And I mean, this is how you remember how Heathcliff and Catherine looked at the people or at the inhabitants of the Grange, until, of course, they deal with them and they prove to be as bad, quote unquote, of course. We also have Terry Eggleton, and like I said, Terry Eggleton is a very famous Marxist critic, and he says uh, um, that one of Wuthering Heights' more notable achievements is ruthlessly to demystify the Victorian notion of the family as a pious, pacific space um, within social conflict. So, what is it that he is trying to say? He's saying that Wuthering Heights, the novel, with what happened inside the two houses that we have in the novel, and the dysfunctional families inside, the hatred and the violence. He is trying to say that Emily Bronte was trying to say that there is more to the notion of family than what we see in the or what we read in books about the Victorian society. I mean, he's trying to say that there is a part that is not being spoken about, which is the idea that we do have dysfunctional families in the Victorian age. I mean, he's trying to say I mean, it was a myth. This was a myth of respectability, a myth of accepted norms that people have to go by. But the novel is uncovering that. The novel is saying that no, it's not all honey and milk. It's not all family where I mean people are pious. It's all quiet and peaceful. No, there was conflict. There were conflicts within the houses and outside them, and sometimes the conflicts within the house or within the family is or corresponds to the social conflicts outside the house. That's again the idea of macrocosm and microcosm. I don't know whether you have heard these notions before. Whenever we talk about people in society, we say that the society itself is the macrocosm. Okay, the individuals of the society are the microcosm. Okay, sometimes there is correspondence and parallels. What happens on the level of macrocosm, whatever happens in society, happens also within the individual. The individual would be the microcosm, and society would be the macrocosm. Okay, if you have done Shakespeare, if you have done Othello, for example, there is a great deal of scholarship and talk about how far the individual can be a microcosm of the larger macrocosm, which is society. I'm hopeful that am not misleading you. It's getting a little bit philosophical, but I know that you are up to it. Um, Again, if you have any questions, so far so good. Okay. Okay. So remember, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this chapter is about approach, with its different associations and senses, and who is an explicit representation of the idea of approach. Of course, it's Heathcliff. Now, when I say Heathcliff, there is a great deal of associations around him. When I drop the name, I'm sure you have the associations uh, of uh, of the name now. So when I say Heathcliff, what comes to your mind? Tell me. What are the associations of Heathcliff to you now that you have been doing him for the past 2 weeks? Strange, Kamar is saying. Gypsy, Arwa is saying. Angry, strange, Fahd is saying. Rude, he has a sense of revenge, like Amal is saying. Outsider, foreigner, yes, yeah, see? Okay, when you lump all these associations together, you come up with the idea of approach. Approach has, like I said, is more than just the physical movement. Approach is unfamiliarity. When an individual is unfamiliar to you, when an individual is foreign to you in terms of manners, in terms of behavior, this is all also this is also part of the makeup of the word approach. Yes. Okay, so Heathcliff is the most obvious representative of approach. We agree on that. In the context of the local and domestic world of the novel, he enters the domestic scene from another world, from the streets of Liverpool. This is again pointing to the idea that he doesn't belong. He's not one of them. Okay, so despite his attempts later to integrate himself into the family, he wouldn't even succeed, even when he gets married from them and he has kids that belong to them. He is the eternal, stranger, if you like. Okay, so he is a true representation of the idea of approach, with all the associations that his name would trigger off when we mention it. Okay, and we have examples. Look at when they first brought him Mr. Earnshaw and what he said about him. Of course, of all the other um, you know characters, I mean, it was only Mr. Earnshaw and Catherine who were in love with of uh, what's his name, Heathcliff. The other characters hated him. The other characters had very negative views of him. So let's even look at what Earnshaw is saying about him. He's saying nice stuff, and then he quickly changed his mind. He says that he is, when he first brought him home from Liverpool, he said he is a gift of God, which is fine, though it's as dark, okay, almost as if it came from the devil. You see, there is a contradiction of terms, if you like. Yeah, a gift of God, but on account of his darkness, the fact that he was dark, he can be a a gift from the devil. See, so it's a we call it a backhanded compliment. You start off by saying he is a gift of God, but you don't leave until you say that yeah, on account of his darkness, he can from the devil. Of course, Mrs. Earnshaw, I mean, she doesn't hide her despise and disdain for him by saying he is a gypsy brat. I mean, she doesn't have, you know, issues. She knows what uh, she's talking about, obviously, and this is pretty much the opinion, the opinion of everyone. They seem to be in agreement with Mrs. Earnshaw. Remember, Lockwood is going to say that he is gypsy. The other characters, as we're going to see, look at Isabella and what she said about him. Lots of, yeah, most of the characters, those who came um, in encounter, those who encountered him came out of this encounter with negative impressions. Look at Linton and what he says about him. He's a little Lascar, and the Lascar is an American or a Spanish castaway. Remember, we're talking about Liverpool and England in general at the time when England was the one of the greatest empires. So it was only natural that you see on its ports people from other countries and from other, and some of them are, of course, not educated. They are workers, dock workers like the Chinese. They come from India. They come from the North American colonies and all these kinds of things. So Mr. Linton, for Linton, excuse me, um, for Linton, Heathcliff is a little Lascar, and Lascar or Lascars were ships crew of Indian origin, often left to starve on arrival at the ship's destination. So it's a castaway. Okay. um, Again, if we go back to what Mr. Lockwood says about him, he simply said that he is a dark-skinned gypsy. Okay. Uh, Again, as you can see, all these descriptions and all these views will somehow be given to him, and he's going to feel it in their eyes and perhaps in their talks and in their treatment, um, and somehow he that would feed into the developing sense of revenge that he is having. The fact that he is treated very badly by everyone, so he might as well think of the time when he can take revenge and take revenge, and he took revenge. I mean, by remember the treatment that he gave to other people. Um, the you know about we have vivid examples of how bad he was treating other people. Lots lots of critics are saying um, that Heathcliff can be a representation of all the oppressed people who are treated badly in all cultures and down through the ages. They are saying that he is perhaps an angel of revenge, if you like. He is an angel of revenge on behalf of a formidable collective of oppressed ethnic groups. So all the ethnic groups of the world have their representation in the character of Heathcliff. He is representing them and he is acting on their behalf. What is it that he is doing? He's taking revenge on their behalf. Whether you agree or not, this is another matter. Would you agree that Heathcliff can be playing this role? That he can be a representation of all those downtrodden, poor people, people who are treated badly everywhere in all cultures, and he is representing them. He is an element of revenge. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with this reading? Fahd is saying yes. Kamar does not agree. Why not? If you think you'll be quicker talking, you can use the mic here, Kamar. Okay, go ahead. The mic is yours.
Yes, thank you. I don't personally find Heathcliff as an oppressed character. There
We
are people more oppressed.
can't hear you.
You can't hear. Can you hear me?
No. Can you hear her? I cannot. I don't know what's happening with me. No. I'm sorry, I cannot hear
Can you
you. I
hear?
don't know why.
Okay, I'm gonna type.
Your voice is not audible to me. And I don't want to mess with my headset and I end up losing everything. I cannot afford this. Okay. Okay. Uh, Kamar is saying, I just think they are more oppressed. There are more oppressed people out there, and like when you look at it, this revenge did not really achieve him anything. He wasn't accepted by the end at the end anyway. So it's not about achieving or not achieving. People who take revenge, they normally they achieve nothing. Okay, but I mean, يعني, I'm not a revenger myself. I cannot speak for them, but you can always understand that they are venting out their anger. Okay, their resentment. They are taking their resentment out, and this is what we're saying is that he is representing these people always and everywhere. There is always oppression. There is always people who feel downtrodden, people who feel that they are not uh, fairly treated. He is a representation because he was, make no mistake about it, he was unfairly treated at the beginning, always. I mean, people used to treat, even when he was rich and had money and everything, people wouldn't forget the fact that he looks different. He's not accepted, he's not recognized, and it's only natural that he would react in a revengeful way. So our question would be that he can be I mean, the society that is treating him in an unfair way, uh, um, is um, kind of uh, receiving what they did. You receive what you give. They treated him unfairly, and he is paying them in kind, like they say. Now we're trying to generalize, and we are trying to say that Heathcliff and those who are like Heathcliff, who are very revengeful, can symbolize the oppressed always and everywhere. Allahu Akbar. Yeah, yeah, this is what we're saying more or less, ya Nabila. We're saying that he represents the marginalized and the oppressed, whether in England or anywhere else, whether at the time or all the time. This is what we're trying to say. Yeah, by the way, Kamal, this is one of the readings. This is one of the interpretations. Remember, this is literature, okay? And people can come up with whatever conclusions they may have, as long as they have a scenario, and the scenario is compact and they can justify what they are saying, and they are on their way, then there shouldn't be a problem. You can see it otherwise, it's okay. See, again, we're talking about the impressions that other people have of him, and for the most part they are negative. And because of the fact the impressions are negative, they treat him accordingly. But we have some redeeming points. I mean, we have people who see in him or see him otherwise, like Nelly, for example. Um, Nelly recommends him, yani asks him to use his otherness. She is acknowledging for all the admiration and for all this closeness that she has with him. She is acknowledging the fact that he is uh, and he is the other, because he doesn't look the same, he doesn't uh, uh, behave the same. She's saying that this otherness, which is bad in the eyes of everybody else, uh, uh, can help him construct a family romance. A family romance with the associations of romance. Romance is about foreign central characters, people who look different, okay, and they have their appeal among people, okay. She is saying that he can use his otherness to construct a family romance, and she's saying you're fit for a prince in disguise. You are a prince in disguise. Who knows but your father, she says, maybe your father was the emperor of China, and perhaps your mother was an Indian queen. Again, this is othering him in an indirect way. She is acknowledging in an indirect way that he doesn't belong. Okay? Again, what she's saying is typical. If she's advocating that he can be a part of a family romance, okay, this was the case in most of the works of art at the time, especially if we talk about romances and if we talk about Gothic romances. The characters or the main characters were foreign characters. I gave you examples um, of one of Radcliffe's Gothic romances where the main character is does not belong. Is also foreign. Okay, so the mysterious heroes of Gothic romance and romantic verse dramas are frequently foreign. Remember when at one point we spoke about Manfred, spoke about the hero of the Corsair by Byron, right? Malcolm, and they all have their origins in places other than England. Okay, and part of the appeal, or part of their appeal, was the fact that they are strange, that they are foreign, they look different, they speak different, they even behave different. Um, okay, again, we're still talking about um, how foreign Heathcliff is, and the fact that he has unknown origins. So Heathcliff represents the experience of societies marginalized and dispossessed. This is one of the. This is a continuation of the reading that we're doing, as him being an element of revenge or an angel of revenge. Okay. Okay. So he represents the experience of societies marginalized and dispossessed. Dispossessed means that people who are poor, they have no access to anything. I mean, money, healthcare, jobs. These are dispossessed and marginalized, and he is representing them in one of the readings of the novel. Though not a regular black, his ethnicity is uncertain and his class is that of a beggar. So he belongs to them. He belongs to these classes, the classes of the oppressed, the classes of the marginalized and the dispossessed. Um, let's look at the description and how Bronte is used to describe him or described him. And it seems that she was kind of uh, influenced by the newspaper reports and illustrations. Remember, the time was a time of social upheavals, um, problems and social revolutions, and even famine and starvation. Remember, Britain was a big empire that has colonies everywhere, and it has. I mean, Ireland was a part of it, was also a colony, and it so happened because this was perhaps mismanagement on the part of the English. There was a famine, a famine when people wouldn't have access to food, and they end up starving and they die. So there was a big famine between 1845 and 1852, and you can almost tell how people would look like coming out of a famine. The famine was in Ireland, and some of the people from Ireland, they went all the way to England, and they were received by some people. I mean, providing them with food and shelter. And when you look at them, you see Heathcliff in them. They look like him in terms of, they would be blackened as the effect of the famine on them. They would look different, disorderly, and everything. So at one point, some critics said that she was also influenced by the description given to these people by newspapers. Um Again, what would also contribute to his this aura of strangeness and foreignness about him would also be the unanswered questions about not only his origins but his whereabouts. Remember, at one point he left, and then came back in perhaps 4 or 5 years, and when he came back, he came rich and educated. this is also a mystery. Okay, and that would also contribute to this atmosphere of or aura of foreignness that is being um, crafted around him. Again, what would you call that? I mean, in one of the interpretations, they say that when he left and came back rich, this is a representation of commercial enterprise. The fact that uh, he has the seeds of a businessman in him. He went and came back rich. And this is also about colonial exploitation. Remember again that England or Britain at the time was a big empire, and they were looting and they were stealing the treasures of other countries and other colonies. He can be a representation of just that, of the empire. Again, we're talking about an atmosphere of strangeness, atmosphere of mystery, and this lack of specific. Nothing is specific about this guy. Nothing is specific. You don't have specific answers about him. Where, I mean, you ask, where is he from? You don't know. Um, who are his family? You don't know. How did he make his money? You don't know. How did he get educated? You don't know. Nothing is certain or sure about him. So this lack of specificity opens up a wealth of possible connections that have been explored in recent post-colonial and cultural criticism. I mean, you have scholarship nowadays called post-colonial. It's the period after the I mean, with after the time when we don't have any empires anymore. We don't have British Empire or French Empire. So we don't have that anymore. So we have studies that is focusing on the colonies after the occupations left them, after the empires are no longer there. And they normally focus on strange characters. They would talk about them, and sometimes they would expand the horizons and the spectrum, and they say that those characters can be potential terrorists. Whether those potential terrorists are justified, like Heathcliff, I mean, they would consider Heathcliff as a terrorist, the way he treats people. Whether he is reacting in kind, reacting uh, um, violently because he received violent treatment or not, this is again out of the scope of our discussion. Okay, somebody is asking about the MTA. We don't have an MTA, Fahd. No MTA. It's only the TMA that you're doing and the final exam. And each one of them is out of 50. No MTA, no midterm exam. Is that clear? Okay. So you still can see the screen, right? My voice is loud enough, and you can also see me, right? Okay. Okay. And we come to the concept of the uncanny. And if you have also done AA100, I think AA100B, right? You have gone through the concept of the uncanny as given expression in the tales of Hoffman, the German writer Hoffman. Okay. So I'm sure you have done your research on what the uncanny means. And it's as simple as the unfamiliar. So the uncanny, whatever is uncanny it is unfamiliar. And under unfamiliar, you can put and squeeze anything. Okay, foreign, strange, weird, not comfortable. I mean, obviously, the sky is the limit when it comes to the negative associations of the word uncanny. So, do we have this reflected in the novel? Absolutely. So, you have weird atmospheres, you have weird characters, you have conflicts, right? So, the novel is a true representation of the uncanny, right? So things that we would describe as uncanny are those that disturb our sense of the familiar. Um, Noof is asking how in the novel home turns into abroad. I keep talking about that. I keep talking about the movement, and I'm stressing the fact that there is obviously more to the movement than the physical. Okay, so the uncanny would be another meaning for abroad. So home would be comfort, would be established Victorian values, right? This is home. But what we're seeing in the novel, this is abroad. But this is, like I said, the abstract level of the novel. Are you getting the point? So abroad would mean the uncanny, would mean the grotesque, would mean unfamiliar stuff, would mean Heathcliff's unknown origins. Okay, this is all abroad in an abstract level of interpretation. Am I making sense? Hello. Okay, good. So things that we would describe as uncanny are those that disturb our sense of the familiar. So the uncanny would be a challenge of what is familiar. So is a challenge of your comfort zones. Okay. So what are our comfort zones? Security, right? Safety, familiar surroundings, people who are normal, they are not psychos, they don't behave abnormally, right? Am I making sense? So this is familiar atmospheres. Whatever comes and challenges these established ideals would be considered uncanny, would be described as unfamiliar, would be described as grotesque in a sense. So so things that we would describe as uncanny are those that disturb our sense of the familiar. The familiar suggests what is known, and the familiar is very close to familiar and family. Don't you see that they? I mean, me, I mean, from a sound point of view, they are very similar. Family, familiar, right? The norms, like Kamar is saying. The word is thus close to our theme of home. So whatever is familiar is home. Whatever is unfamiliar is abroad. So what are the associations of the abroad now? It's the uncanny, it's the unfamiliar, which has different representations and different echoes through the characters of Heathcliff and others, right? So the uncanny has an immediate contrasting association with what is uh, um, with its strangeness and what is unfamiliar, which relates to our other theme of abroad. So the uncanny would be summing up the idea of abroad in one way or another. And then we have grotesque. A grotesque, it normally has to do with shapes. It has to do with distortion of shapes, distortion of facts, distortion of realities. So whatever is grotesque is top topsy turvy, if you like, upside down. And whatever is upside down, obviously, it's a challenge to our senses. You're familiar with whatever is straightforward, right? But if you have something upside down, if you have something distorted, this is obviously a challenge to your normal sensibilities, right? Abnormal habits. And you can see lots of them again with the character of Heathcliff, with the complicated relationships between and among the different people in the novel. So the grotesque is another quality that might be associated with the uncanny. There are certainly numerous grotesque elements in Wuthering Heights. And you have different examples. The idea of apparition and ghosts. This is uncanny and this is grotesque. We don't have ghosts and apparitions in real life, right? The extreme and the exaggerated level of violence is also not normal at all. Look at how he behaves. Heathcliff when she dies, and even look at Catherine at one point when she says when she talks about earth and heaven and the fact that she had a dream of her moving to heaven, and she didn't like it. Who wouldn't like heaven? Who wouldn't like to be in heaven? Very strange, right? Very grotesque. What do you think? Okay. So again, because of the this great deal of uncanny stuff, of unfamiliar stuff, of stuff that would challenge our or Victorian sensibility, they started to dig deep and started to look for possible sources for the novel. They started to say, listen, the novel, she can't be, Emily Bronte must have been, must have come under the influence of readings that she made. And they started to look, oh, okay, where is she getting these ideas? What is inspiring? Who are the writers that are inspiring her? And they started to dig deep, and they started to say, listen, she was, if not a contemporary, she was very close to the period when the Romantics were there. She must have read the Romantics. She must have read Byron. She must have read Wordsworth, and with their romantic ideas. And romance is about the wild. Romantic ideas are all about revolution, is about assaulting and challenging your senses, about not taking stuff for granted. She must have been under their influence, reading their poetry. She herself was a poet. Who else were operating or was operating at the time? Okay, within the self same period or a little bit earlier, there was also Hoffmann, and Hoffmann is a German novelist and short story writer, and his novels and his work is full of the uncanny. She must have read them, And this time around, she must have been read in translation, assuming that she doesn't know German. Okay. So there are specific possible sources for Wuthering Heights in the Hoffman's novel, The Devil's Elixir, and his short stories, The Entail and The Sandman. Now, we did The Sandman in one of the courses. And she could have had access to these works in translation from German, of course. Okay. So somebody was asking me how the uncanny turns the home into a prude, and critic Andrew Benner is and another critic by the name of Nicholas Royal are providing an answer to this. They are saying, so critics Andrew Benner and Nicholas Royal provide a helpful summary of some of the common features of the uncanny, emphasizing how the uncanny defamiliarizes, makes the familiar unfamiliar, how it turns home into abroad. This is answering Nov's question. Nov had a question about the same. Okay. Um, in one of its definitions, the uncanny is about hidden secrets, things that should have been kept a secret. Nobody should know about because of how perhaps shocking to the tastes and to the senses they were. So Schelling defined the uncanny as that which ought to have remained secret and hidden, but has come to light. And when it comes to light, you wouldn't accept it. It would challenge you and your senses and sensibilities. And so the reviewer who complained that Wuthering Heights lifts the veil, one of the reviewers said just that. He said that the novel lifts the veil and shows boldly the dark side of our depraved nature. One of the critics, one of the reviewers said that whether we like it or not, our natures are depraved. We are not as normal as we imagine that we are, or as we think we are. We are depraved human beings. Okay, and it's novels like these, novels like Wuthering Heights, that bring to the fore those or this depravity, or those depraved actions that are part of us. So home and abroad can both be mapped onto the uncanny, with Heathcliff's otherness a matter of his uncanny nature as much as his foreign origin. Again, look at the atmosphere, the entire atmosphere, the violence, the predominating sense of violence. Okay, this is all uncanny. Again, the uncanny is very much related to the idea of the Gothic, and we spoke about the Gothic at one point, and we said these are novels where you also have depraved characters as main characters, and you have women as subjected to all types of ill treatment. They are kidnapped and sometimes killed. So this is all Gothic, as you can see, uncanny and Gothic. Okay. So critics, while also exploring Wuthering Heights, they started to establish affinities with other genres, and they believe that those other genres are sources of inspiration for Bronte. She wrote her work, her novel, Wuthering Heights, under the influence of these things. And one of them would be romantic poetry. The poetry written by the Romantics. And I think you know who the Romantics were. When I talk about Wordsworth, about Shelley, Coleridge, Lord Byron, those are the Romantics. What is so characteristic about their poetry? Their poetry is different from mainstream poetry. Mainstream poetry would be classical poetry, where you have lines written in a certain way, where the themes are classical, they are all about decorum, they are all about social conventions that people should follow and stick to. When the Romantics came, they said no. Okay, this should not be the subject of poetry. Poetry should be about human beings, about the inner recesses of human beings. We don't talk again anymore about what meets the eye in terms of physique, in terms of how I dress. No, we go inside the human being and give expression to whatever is inside. But this was a shift. This was a revolutionary shift. And they chose for their subject matter, you know, ordinary people in the countryside. Of course, ordinary people in the countryside would be unfamiliar to people who live in the city, in London. Okay, their issues that and the issues that they would address in their poetry would be also revolution. They talk about social revolutions. They talk about how corrupt the institutions, the governmental institutions are. So they were different. Okay. So the idea now is that Emily Bronte may have been affected or may have come under the influence of the Romantics. Okay, and how different they are. When I say Romantics, it's a lot of the associations are a lot. So from the moment of its publication, Wuthering Heights invited comparisons with forms outside the novel and its chief home genre, the romance. So once the novel was out, people started to strike comparisons between it and other works and other forms of expression, literary forms of expression. And one of them would be romantic poetry. Remember, she lived a little after the Romantics. Again, you would also consider the idea that she herself was a poet. She was given to poetry and she wrote poetry. Emily Bronte has also been frequently described as a writer whose work has its true home not in prose fiction but in poetry. This is what people would say, that you can almost feel the lyricism and the poeticity of her style, the fact that her style was very poetic. You may have noticed that if you have read her novel, you may have been stopped at one point. Stopped by the lines. The lines you can stop and you start admiring the style. The style was more or less like a poet than that of a prose writer. And of course, you know the difference. The images that she is using, the words, even the diction, the vocab that she is using is also taken from the world of poetry. So the novel's relationship with poetry is certainly a crucial aspect of its composition. So whether she got influenced by her work as a poet or her extensive reading of poetry, the result would be that that had such a huge impact on her writing experience in Wuthering Heights. This can be seen and touched in Wuthering Heights. So, um, what are her sources? We're saying that she is poetic and her novel is poetic. Uh, who she was she under the influence of? She was under the influence of the Bible, which was written in the Bible of King James was written in a poetic language. I mean, nobody can miss the beauty of the language. She was affected by that as a Christian. She was also affected by the 17th century poet John Milton, and John Milton is high and mighty. He is, of course, known for his Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained and stuff like that. And of course, the Romantic poets, because they lived in a period that was very close to her. They were dying, and she was kind of she started life. She must have read them, especially to enhance her abilities as a poet herself. And then you have that in the book. You have this activity where there is a close reading of a passage that she wrote. I would like you to go to the book and read this part and see how the writer is talking about how poetic her language is, how poetic her style is in terms of the diction, the words that she is using, in terms of the imagery. Okay. Okay. So we were talking about romantic poetry. Now we'll talk about romanticism. And romanticism has more than one level or one definition. One of them would be romanticism that has to do with romance. Romance would have to do with people falling in love with each other. Okay, so you have romantic unions, two people falling in love with each other. But again, their romance is not a conventional romance. Make no mistake about it. It's very strange. Okay, and it has those ups and downs, and then at the end, you remember what happened and how close he was to her. He wanted to stay there in her grave, and she herself, prior to that, she dreamt of going to heaven, but she didn't want to stay there. And very strange relationship, romantic relationship. It's not also a normal relationship. So Wuthering Heights' affinities with romantic literature are especially strong in its portrayals of romantic union and of the natural world. Specific allusions to romantic poetry underpin Catherine and Heathcliff's passionate declarations of a union of souls. Remember, if you have gone through the novel, you may have seen that Catherine talking about Heathcliff and saying, "I'm Heathcliff," which is very. It would be if you're familiar with romantic poetry, you would have seen that in Shelley's work. At one point, he would say, "I am not thine, I am a part of thee." Okay, thine, of course, would be you, and thee would be also you. Okay. Heathcliff would also call on Catherine at one point and say, "Come and hear me, be with me, always take any form, drive me mad." See, take any form. take any form, it means that we're not talking about normal human beings. And this would be also a reference or a reminder of Manfred's speech to his dead sister. Remember, we spoke about Manfred, um, right? Which is a poetic drama by Lord Byron, the Romantic. So Manfred would invoke his dead sister and talk to her. Come to me, I mean, it was. So it's not only other dead or absent or missing human beings that they are evoking, they are evoking also outside nature, the natural world, which is typically romantic, by the way. So a further link with Romanticism is obvious or clear in the novel's constant evocation of the natural world, the outside world, whether this is stormy or lyrical. Stormy, outside Wuthering Heights, you have seen the weather and how stormy it was. And also there was this idea of the natural world. I mean, going when we talk about the hereafter and heaven and earth, and whether you remember Catherine talking about earth being better than heaven or the heavens. So throughout Wuthering Heights, every mood and season in nature, its weather, skies, bird song is lovingly detailed. You have so many details. That's why the novel is so big. Okay, it's also due to the details that we have, especially when there is when description of outside nature is involved. There is obviously a celebration of outside nature, whether it's stormy or not. Again, there is also a direct reference to the corruption in human nature. Look at Heathcliff and the other characters and how corrupt they are to the core, in terms of treatment, in terms of violence, in terms of the mistrust that they have for each other, right? So lack of sympathy, corruption, corrupt souls, right? No mercy whatsoever. Revenge. There is a predominating and a controlling sense of revenge that you can feel and you can smell all over. Again, uh, perhaps this is a reference to the romantic idea that human beings are um, they are good by nature, but it's only through perhaps encounter with each other that they get corrupt. The distortion of innate affections and innate um, feelings. People are normally, when they are born, they are innocent, and then over time they acquire violence and villainy and all these kinds of things. We're not done yet. When we finish, yeah, when we finish Yanur, we'll talk about it. Don't worry. Okay. See how the novel is full of stuff. They even talk about psychology when they deal with the novel, which is a foreign thing, which was not common at the time. Remember, we're talking about the 19th century, where the novel of psychology was not there yet. They say that there is a great deal of psychological analysis and psychology in the novel. So the dominant models of psychology at the time presented a view of the individual interior life as driven by warring energies. So there was at the time, this was like I said, psychology was in its infant years. They were starting experimenting with human nature, the inside of man. The focus before was on what meets the eye. I mean, the outside. Now there is a focus on the inside of man, and they had this very common idea at the time. This was very commonplace that man from the inside has he has energies, and those energies, some of those energies are negative and the others are positive, and they are fighting over the soul and the mind of the individual. Okay, so you have conflicting energies, and they are inside you. They perhaps may dictate your actions, and one of them has to win eventually. But you can always understand which side won in the case of Heathcliff, for example, and in the case of the in most of the characters, by the way, it's obviously the negative side or the evil side. So the dominant models of psychology at the time presented a view of the individual interior life as driven by warring energies, fighting and conflicting, fighting for dominion, for control, as energetically as in the political and economic struggles of the world outside. So there is conflict outside, social and political and economic outside, and within the human being there is also a conflict between warring forces, and the warring forces are trying to claim the individual to their side. So again, the mind was envisaged as consisting of competing faculties. These faculties required an outlet, and while the exercise of self-control was crucial to achieving a balance between the forces within each individual, over tyrannical suppression was likely to breed. So again, as an individual in the Victorian society, it is true that you have those competing energies within yourself, but society as and its conventions keep you at check, um, keep you at even at bay, which means that they promote ideas of balance. You need to maintain the balance between the forces, and if the good one is not winning, is not coming out, at least you need to suppress and keep the evil forces in check. They shouldn't go out, otherwise you become a criminal, you become another Heathcliff, and so on. But there is also a warning. Sometimes suppressing something, and you keep suppressing it, it eventually explodes. But they are also warning. In the same breath, they would warn people of keeping suppressing something uh, all the time. It can result in a revolution or an explosion. So you maintain the balance, but from time to time you have to engage in you know in things that would momentarily give vent to some of those suppressed feelings. So Heathcliff's psychology and the warring feelings that he has inside him might be understood as a microcosm of aggressive capitalism approach. So you have capitalism abroad, you have the industrial revolution, which made a lot of people redundant and out of employment and work. Okay, and you have Heathcliff having also within himself those forces. Those, so he is a microcosm of the macrocosm that is called society outside. Okay, so again, we're coming to the idea that Heathcliff is a representation of society and is a representation of oppression and suppression. You suppress people, you don't give them rights, you don't allow them to speak, and the next thing you know is that they explode. This happened in one of the, if you're familiar with Jane Eyre, Jane Eyre is a novel written by, what's the name of the this is one of the sisters, of course, of uh, is it by Charlotte Bronte? I'm not sure. Yeah. Oh, okay. So Jane Eyre uh, is another novel, and it's by one of the Bronte sisters, and we have a character within the novel by the name of Bertha, and Bertha is represented as a mad woman, and they normally refer to her in literary scholarship as the mad woman in the attic. Attic is the I mean, it's the top room in a building. If you have a building on top, you have a roof, or you have an attic where people normally store stuff over there. So Bertha was kept in this attic, and of course she was I mean, denied everything. Over time she becomes mad, and this is again the effect of suppression, the fact that she was suppressed on different levels. And the next thing you know is that she's going to set the whole house ablaze. She's going to set fire to the house, and she dies obviously, and her husband gets burned and everything. So this is the effect of suppression. This is the effect of oppression. This is the effect of torture. Okay, so there is parallels and comparisons and correspondence between Bertha and Heathcliff. The only difference would be that Heathcliff is not crazy, is not mad. He didn't become mad like Bertha, and that's the reason why. Yeah, I mean, he takes revenge, and he I mean, he doesn't come up with very I mean, um, apparently crazy actions. I mean, he is, of course, he's deranged and he is depraved and everything, but he knows how to manage it, not like Bertha. Okay, again, it's all because he was oppressed, he was treated very badly, right? He was suppressed, he was made fun of. They are, in one way or another, representations of the oppressed and the suppressed. Okay, sometimes they can control themselves, they can contain their anger, but you wouldn't know what will happen next. Okay, Bertha couldn't control herself, and she exploded, and Heathcliff uh, is morose, is revengeful, is everything. So Shuttleworth compares Heathcliff to Bertha. Both figures demonstrate the consequences of suppressing the socially marginalized. So Bertha is marginalized because she is a woman. Heathcliff is marginalized because he is different. He looks different. He behaves different, right? He doesn't have known origins. So Bertha's suppressed energies erupt or explode or come out in uncontrolled revolution, while Heathcliff's um, he doesn't explode. He has this controlled revenge. Unlike Bertha, Heathcliff is not mad. At least this is what Nelly is telling us. Of course, if you overlook the fact that his obsession with Catherine and stuff, that would be considered madness. But if you put this aside, he was fine. But he was still revengeful, um, and he was wrathful, he was resentful, and everything. Again, we have Susan Meyer, and she's saying that Wuthering Heights provides an extended critique of imperialism. So criticism of imperialism means having an empire, and colonizing people and suppressing them, looting them and stealing their treasures. Again, uh, Meyer is saying that perhaps Emily Bronte is trying to imagine what may happen when oppressed colonies and nations rise up and decide to revolt against the colonizers and empires liking. She's perhaps envisioning or envisioning this scenario, which is obviously a nightmare if it happens. Again, what Heathcliff is saying can be a projection of what may happen, his revenge program. What may happen, people like Heathcliff who are suppressed, who are economically disadvantaged, if they decide to revolt against these situations. This is again, this is perhaps what Emily had in mind. She is thinking of the time when those suppressed and those oppressed and those who are treated badly uh, would go out and declare that they wouldn't take it no more. Are you tired? Would you give me another 10 minutes? Okay, good. Okay. Again, there is a great deal of theology in the North. Theology means religion, religious references. And foremost among those theological references would be this very famous, or these very famous quotes by both Catherine and Heathcliff when it comes to their relationship and how they see the relationship against, um, you know, paradise and heaven and otherwise. If you still remember, and this is oft quoted, this is oft referred to. People often refer to this reference, to this quotation when they talk about um, perhaps the craziness of this relationship. At one point, Catherine would say that if I were in heaven, she was obviously confiding in Nelly, she was talking to her. She says, if I were in heaven, Nelly, I should be extremely miserable. I dreamt once that I was there. Heaven didn't seem to be my home, and I broke my heart with weeping to come back to earth. And the angels were so angry that they flung me out into the middle of the heath on the top of Wuthering Heights, where I woke sobbing for joy. So what do you understand? So her heaven is obviously on earth. Okay, which is very strange. I mean, this is also challenging the Victorian religious sensibilities. So people would like to go to, would wish to go to heaven, right? And heaven, by heaven, of course, we mean paradise, right? Very weird, very strange, right? Again, uh, look what and then we move to Heathcliff, and Heathcliff is saying, today I am within sight of my heaven, hardly 3 feet to sever me. Obviously he's talking about the grave of Catherine and the fact that he is like 3 feet away, and this is his heaven. So you have those guys are reversing and is challenging conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom would say that heaven is above, and that nobody and everybody welcomes the opportunity to go to heaven, right? But their heaven is on earth, obviously, which is again very strange. So as you can see, Emily Bronte locates the afterlives of her protagonist at home on earth rather than in heaven, suggesting a pantheistic rather than conventionally Christian one. This is obviously a pantheistic idea. Pantheistic, they have this convention, this belief that all elements of nature partake in nature. I mean, there is a leveling process. All the elements of nature are one and the same. Animals, human beings, trees. Okay, and this idea of pantheism has also has to do with the idea of people or any creature for that matter dying and then turning into another creature depending on whether he was good or bad in his early life. So again, these are non-Christian Christian beliefs. These are pantheistic beliefs, which is also very strange. This is again a challenge to the existing religious sensibilities of the Victorians. So as you can see, the novel is seen as a systematic reversal of biblical hierarchies. You know what a hierarchy is? A chain. You have a certain organization and a certain arrangement where heaven is on top and earth is at the bottom. So we're reversing the hierarchy where earth becomes on top and heaven becomes at the bottom. Very strange, right? This is a reversal of biblical established hierarchies. Of course, we spoke about Milton, and we said that Milton was a poet, and she was under the influence. He was one of her poetic sources. And Milton is was a religious poet, and he wrote very famous religious poems, like his very famous epic Paradise Lost, where he talks about the fall of man from grace because of the insinuations of Eve and the devil. Um, we're having that as Heathcliff is presented here as Adam who falls from grace because of what he does, violence and revenge and all these kinds of things. He's more or less, he's not um, even, I mean, he's not even Adam. He is a distorted image of Adam, if you like. And they are also linking even Heathcliff with his the way he looks to Satan, and the fact that the two of them fall from grace, from the grace of God. And you have reference to that. You can almost tell. You wouldn't be surprised if he is compared to the devil. Most of the characters refer to him as the devil. Look at Mr. Earnshaw at the beginning, right? So from the start, Heathcliff is seen as a gift less of God than of the devil. Almost all the characters compare him to the devil. To Isabella, his eyes are the clouded windows of hell, hell, from which a fiend look out. I'll stop on this note and with this one. Whatever is left is very little. We can always finish it in 15 minutes next time. Okay. Do you have energy so that we can? I mean, do you have any energies left so that we can talk about the TMA? And somebody was asking about the TMA. So what is it that you want to know about the TMA? Ask. I mean, I would like you to ask. If you have questions, you can always ask. So, where are you in the TMA? If we divide the TMA into stages, so you are, I think the first thing that people do would be to study the TMA very well, to read the TMA, understand it very well. So how can you understand the TMA very well if the idea or the theme cuts across the three novels and you only have had one novel? This is a question that you should ask yourself, right? So at this point, if I were in your shoes, if I were you, I would be studying the novel that we have done. Of course, you have the concept of home is in the introduction. Okay, so you need to study it very, very well, right? And then read the three novels. Okay, read the three novels and try to kind of strike comparisons and contrasts between and among them. You even may want to wait until we finish the second and the third, and we still have time, I think. Okay, the idea is that I don't want you to go and submit, and then after that you come to me and say, listen, there are lots of things that I didn't notice or I didn't add and I need to resubmit. In this case, we'll say no. It's only one time submission. What I would also suggest that you make a study group or different study groups depending on how many we are, and then each and every study group work together, come up with ideas, discuss the material, highlight whatever is worth highlighting, and that can be a source of inspiration to you so that when you write you have a lot of material. Okay. uh, it's both. Yeah, Kamar is asking whether we can use quotes from the books or we use reference. Of course, you have ideas that you need to support. You can use quotations from them from the book, and you also need to read about the novel. Now you're reading the novel. This stage is about reading the novel or the novels. This is called the primary sources stage. When we're done with that, when we have highlighted whatever we think is worth highlighting within the novels, and we read them thoroughly, we move to the secondary sources stage where I go and check for material that would support the ideas that I'm going to raise or talk about. Okay? So it's not about who is going to finish first and go and submit. We don't give, we don't give grades or more grades to those who submit early or submit or those who are first submitters. We don't have grades for first submitters. So you need to take your time. You need to exercise wisdom in dealing with the stuff. Okay? Don't rush things and then you feel sorry and regretful and you come and cry and we're used to that, by the way. Hala is saying, Doctor, how many references are required? The sky is the limit. No, I'm just kidding. 3 or 4 references would be fine. Yeah. But if you think you can add more because you read more, that's fine. Okay. No Wikipedia, please. Okay. Wikipedia is not a reference. Okay, Nirmin. We'll see you next time, inshallah. Any other questions before we leave? Yes. No. Somebody is asking me, Yara, when we start answering the TMA, can we ask you something in WhatsApp? Yeah, provided that you don't, we don't end up chatting. I did this and I did that. I did this. I don't have time, Allah. I don't have the luxury to answer every single question. And some of the questions are, um, you wouldn't ask them if you think about them. I teach so many courses, and I am normally an accommodating and a welcome individual. Lots of people know me, but keep me as a last resort. If you have intelligent and smart questions, that's okay.